Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm here with my friend Rob Henderson today, and we're going to talk about the Many Saints of Newark, the new Sopranos prequel that just came out a week or two ago, about three or 4 days ago in the U.S., and then earlier in the U.K. and elsewhere, I think. Rob, how you doing?
Good, Richard. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, but well, not because of this movie. I mean, this movie made me really, really unhappy. So
Yeah.
we've done a Sopranos podcast before, and we're both big fans of the show. We think it's brilliant. We think the characters are compelling. We really just, I probably, I don't know. I'm not going to speak for you, but I became emotionally invested in the characters in the story. So somebody makes a prequel, right? I'll take that as canon. I'll take that as the real Sopranos universe. Uh,
Yeah.
and this one, I think it wasn't even about the Sopranos. It was just about taking the political obsessions of 2020 and 2021 and shoving them all into a movie. So basically, the main characters aren't even the Italian mob. The main character is basically a black guy in Newark, right? And
I would say he's sort of a co-lead. No, I would
he's
still say Dicky Moltisanti was sort of the primary protagonist, but the advertising was misleading because you're sort of led to believe that young Tony, Michael Gandolfini, is
yeah,
going
he
to,
doesn't
to,
matter.
to be like the primary character and the protagonist, but he's very much a sort of secondary or tertiary character, and it's more centered on Dicky and Harold, who's this sort of black associate of the mob, who
Yeah,
does take up considerably more time than Tony himself.
yeah.
But I don't know if he's like the sort of star of the show. I don't know
Okay,
if
well, he's
that's
at least a co-star. Okay, so it's
yeah.
already it's now half BLM, right, and half Sopranos, and
Yeah.
this guy's origin
Mhm.
story. He
Mhm.
is, he's working for Dicky Baltasante. Dicky Baltasante. I mean, for those who are not as familiar with the Sopranos universe, he is Chris Baltasante's father, and he is
Mhm.
a relative. I think we think a cousin of Carmela, and he knew Tony, and so he grew up with these guys. So he's hanging out with a young Sil and a young Polly in the movie. And like little Tony is like 10, and then there's a part where he's like 15, and little Tony like follows him around everywhere, and so that's the relationship between all these people. And so yeah, I mean, so this black guy, what's his name again? I forget. Harold, right?
Harold, yeah.
Yeah. So Harold, he goes on the run because he observes police brutality. He observes police shooting some rioters, right? Or no, he
Yeah.
goes, no, he kills one of his associates, one of the black guys who
Well,
robbed him or something. But then later he
yeah.
does get involved with like he's
Like
angry
Black
over,
Panthers.
yeah. So he's doing that, and he's
Well,
okay. So
yeah. Did he really get involved? I mean, of course, like there was that instance of police brutality, which apparently it was inspired by something that happened in Newark in the late 1960s. There were riots in that area as a consequence of some kind of police brutality thing. But I don't know if that was like, I mean, the movie makes it out to be like that was the inciting incident for his sort of movement towards sort of, Black Power or something. But Harold, I think he also sort of got swept up in the times, right? Like the first, time period of the movie is like the sort of, like the late 1960s, right? And then later when Tony Soprano was older and like sort of the later time period of the film, it's like the mid 1970s. And so I think like that was sort of a tumultuous period of American history where like there were people who were like, maybe like not whatever, they didn't have like a racial consciousness, but then like, through the 60s and the 70s, you did have these like movements cropping up and like hippies and, that was like overnight things had changed in
yeah, okay,
America,
fine. Make a
which
movie
is
about that, but don't
yeah,
use The
which
Sopranos
David
as an
Chase did want to
excuse.
do. I think David Chase wanted to do that. I think like part of the reason you and I are both disappointed in this movie is because David Chase, I think he wanted to make a movie about the Newark riots because he remembered them from his childhood. But I'm not sure if he could like get the funding or secure the sort of interest that he wanted in the film unless he sort of folded it into a Sopranos prequel. And I think this is sort of like why the movie was so disappointing, honestly, is like, I listened to some interviews with David Chase about this, because I was really excited, man. Like I was like, as soon as this movie was announced, I was like reading about it, and like when they cast Michael Gandolfini, I was like, this movie's going to be, it's looking like it's going to be pretty good. And David Chase himself said, like, when he set out to make this film, he wanted it to be a really good gangster movie. Of course, like, it's supposed to, sort of pay tribute to The Sopranos, but he wanted it to be a really good gangster movie. It wasn't a good gangster movie. Like, it wasn't a good Sopranos movie. It wasn't a good gangster movie. It wasn't even really that good in terms of portraying the riots, I don't think, simply because, like, even that aspect of the story gets watered down because he tries to make a Sopranos movie. And yeah, so yeah, I think there was, he tried to do like both like too much with it, and he didn't like seem to know what he wanted this movie to be.
Yeah. Well, it's not just the it's not just the fact that they took this focus off the Italian mob and put it on this black guy Harold. It's like the way the story is presented, right? So he's first working for Dicky Moltisanti, and then he decides, this line gets me. He's like, we're going to be, I'm going to have the first black run numbers game. Like, okay, if he wants to run a numbers game, fine. Right. But he does it. But the criminals do not think in terms of, they're looking at Newark's history and saying, I'm going to be the first black man to do this. Right. That was just such a, fake BS scene. And then his friend, he's got this friend who he's like, man, we can't go up against the mob. The Italians, they got a lot of soldiers. He's like, ain't you a soldier? And he's like, no, I never thought about myself like that. Well, maybe you should start, right? It's like, oh, you don't have to live with these stereotypes. You can overcome them, right? It's so cliche. It's not it's not like people. I mean, this is the way like the New York Times or like the first black numbers game in Newark, right? It's not the way that the criminals would think about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was, well, so one thing that's interesting is if you look at the the Rotten Tomatoes critics versus audience score, that's usually like a decent barometer of like who this movie appeals to. Does it appeal to sort of cultural elite taste? Like how high is the critic score? And then how much is like the average viewer, how much did they enjoy it? And in this case, it's like the Rotten Tomato score for this movie is like 50% among the audience. So like half the audience didn't like this movie. And then for the critics, it's like 75%. So the critics tended to enjoy this film. So it was, I think, sort of pandering to critics, to sort of people with culturally elite taste, people who would like appreciate the sort of racial elements of this movie and the sort of racial awakening of the Harold character. Well, one thing that like stood out to me, like another reason why this movie falls flat, because it like unfavorably compares to, of course, it unfavorably compares to the series of The Sopranos, but there's the Frank Lucas character who's like the black boss of like the black crime family. And maybe I don't know if you've seen the movie American Gangster, the 2007 movie with Denzel Washington.
I think so. Is this the guy who was down in North Carolina?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he's from there, but I know that he, for a while, like wielded a lot of power, like as much or more than the mafia itself in New York City.
Person. You're not talking about
a real person. Okay. Yeah, Frank Lucas was a real guy who was like somehow like originally worked, I think, for the Italian mob, but then later sort of started his own thing and gained a lot of power and like whatever. And so Denzel Washington portrayed him, and it was a good movie, 2007, American Gangster. But then like this movie, Many Saints, like I think it tried to like borrow some elements from that movie and from that story of Frank Lucas with the Harold character. And I think Frank Lucas himself was actually in this movie very briefly. And yeah, it just didn't work. Like the origin story of this Harold character, nobody knew who this guy was. If you're a fan of The Sopranos, like he was never mentioned. I guess he's loosely sort of related to or associated with Willie Overall, who was the very first person Tony Soprano killed when he was a young man. He was the guy that Tony's dad sort of had him kill this guy, Willie Overall. Like in the series, in season 6, Tony and Paulie have to go like, on the run because I guess like the FBI or something.
So, wait, what's the relationship between that Willie guy and this guy?
They briefly mentioned Willie Overall in Many Saints. Like I think Harold and like, one of his like black associates very briefly mentioned Willie Overall or something like that. And I think like, so then like if you're a fan of The Sopranos, you kind of like understand that there's a connection there. And then later on, like when Tony grows up a little bit more, he's going to have to kill this guy. But that was another thing. It's like, it was fun for me, like those little moments of like, because I'm like, I'm a Soprano super fan and like I've watched these episodes many times. Like I could pick those little moments out. But like if you're not a big, like if you're not a huge fan of the series and like you don't really know what's going on, the movie itself didn't have like much of an arc. Like it was like one scene after another. You never get invested in the characters.
Yeah.
I don't know. What like did you have like any feeling or of attachment at all to, you know, Tony, to Dickie? I mean, we can get into like Dickie's arc too, but I mean, if you
No,
want to sort of
it's
yeah, get
weird.
into that.
Well, okay, but yeah, but I mean, the race stuff is not even. It's not. I mean, it's like half of it, right? I thought there was a
Yeah.
real big feminist, arc throughout it. Right, the one who has a real
Okay.
arc is okay. So every part
The
of this
Italian
is just
woman?
so. Yeah, the Italian woman. So every part of
Mm.
this is just terrible because his dad, Dickie Moltisanti's dad, brings her back from Italy and he marries her. Right, she's this pretty young Italian woman and he's an old guy. Right.
Ray
He
Liotta, the Ray Liotta character. Yeah.
Yeah, so Dickie Moltisanti Sr. like pushes her down the stairs or beats her up. And then his son kills him over it, which is like
Yeah,
doesn't seem
Dickie
very
Jr.
realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that seems very realistic. I think beating your wife among that crowd was pretty normal. And for a guy to kill his father, like a mobster to kill his father over that, it struck me as very, very implausible. But maybe plausible for the critics who would like that, right? If you want to make a gangster sympathetic. Um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I mean, you notice this, like, so Tony Soprano, like in the show, like never beats his wife. So, like, the guys who are like, you're supposed to like see protagonists, like you can kill people, but you can't be a wife beater, right? That's just like not allowed.
Yeah,
In,
yeah.
in
I mean, that's an interesting point. I mean, but I don't know if they would get mad about it. There was that, so I guess we're gonna have to constantly reference The Sopranos to understand this movie as much as we, if this movie can be understood in that way. But Richie Aprile in season 2, there's that scene between so Tony and Richie are at the table and Christopher Moltisanti is there, and Richie was like, I heard that you put your hands on my niece, referencing Adriana. I
oh
guess,
yeah, that's right.
yeah, and whatever he says something like, if I hear that you put your hands on my niece again, you and I are going to have words, but
Yeah, I guess that's
unless you
true.
give her your name. That's what he said.
Oh yeah,
Once you
yeah,
give
that's
her
right,
your
that's
name,
right.
like if you guys are married, it's not my business. If you want to beat her up, then, but
Yeah,
until then,
yeah,
don't. So it was like, you're right, like Tony never hit his wife. We don't really know about the situation with the other guys, but I think it's like they usually didn't inflict violence on their wives, but I think if they did, it wouldn't have been like something to murder them over, right?
yeah.
Especially
Well,
like,
the Godfather movie. Was it Godfather? Was it Godfather one where they really? I mean, when Sonny goes to kill the guy because he beat the sister, right? So it's like it's sort of a,
mm,
uh, yeah, it is. It does happen. This was 40. This was 50 years ago. I mean, this was an
yeah,
early.
that
This
was
was
the
a
late
very
1960s. Like,
yeah,
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 and these were like criminal, like, these were criminals, right? Like, they didn't have like that kind. They didn't think about the world in that way. They wouldn't have been that enlightened. I mean, yeah, that was a very odd scene, but I guess like what my interpretation of the whole film, based on sort of what we know about David Chase and what we know about The Sopranos, is like there was this sort of Freudian or Oedipal themes of the film, right? Of like Dickie killing his father, like, killing the father, marrying his stepmother, or not marrying her, but like falling in love with her and having sex with whatever. Like,
is that a video theme? I mean, she's an adult woman who
yeah.
anybody would be attracted. It's not the same as the it's not the same thing, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there was like something about this, about like killing the father, sort of falling in love with the mistress, although he ends up murdering her too.
Yeah.
But that's sort of like what like those themes are ever present in The Sopranos, where like, Melfi and Tony constantly have that tension about Olivia, and how Tony constantly accuses Melfi of saying, "Oh, you're saying that I'm in love with my mom. I want to fuck my mom." Like, and then in Many Saints, young Tony is trying to get these antipsychotic or these sort of psychiatric medications
Oh, I
for his
hated that. Oh,
mom.
that was worse than anything because that was the most implausible part because when he's an adult in The Soprano, so like okay, so there's an agenda here that like these backwards people who are just working class and criminals obviously, but like one generation or two generations removed from immigrating to the country, they're so backwards they don't take mind altering drugs, whatever a doctor recommends that they do so, and so like Tony is like trying to go against the grain and like his mom is miserable and he's like trying to get his mom these whatever what are they antidepressants or whatever.
Psychiatric meds. Yeah.
And so like that's like a theme throughout the show. Now when Tony like when he, so if Tony's like that woke on psychiatry at like 15, right? When he's seeing a psychiatrist later in the show, he's very skeptical, right?
Mm, well, okay, so like, well, clearly Tony did end up seeing the psychiatrist. I don't think
Oh,
Tony
it was
had
court
a.
ordered. It was court ordered. What?
Oh no, no, it wasn't. He did it because of the panic attacks.
No, no. But
Um,
the beginning, I thought it was. Wasn't it court ordered at the beginning?
No, 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 no. It wasn't. It was never court ordered.
You
Tony
sure?
saw Melfi because he kept like he had the panic attack. Saw Melfi, said like "fuck this, I'm not coming back," and then he had another panic attack and he returned and sort of resigned himself to the fact that he would have to continue seeing her because of the his issues with the panic attacks. So I think like Tony
originally,
himself was. Yeah, or in the series, yeah, the Soprano series. But I think like so Tony, he was like I don't think he ever had a like personally a big problem with therapy. I think he was more concerned with how it looked to the guys, how
yeah,
it could possibly endanger his life, like how basically like the risks associated with therapy, rather than like sort of like not taking it, having a negative view of it himself. But I think like as a young kid, like he wasn't thinking that in those kind of sophisticated terms about like how do I feel about psychiatry or whatever. I think for the he really just wanted like his mom to get better, right? Like that was another kind of inconsistency between the movie and then the series was that
yeah,
there was a scene in the series where Tony and Melfi are talking about, Melfi says, "Do you have any happy memories of your family?" And Tony says like, "Oh, one time my dad fell down the stairs and everyone was laughing, including my mom. It was so funny."
uh,
And that was like his happy memory. But then like the movie tries to like, I don't know, soften Tony up and like make the
yeah.
character seem more likable, where there's the school counselor saying like, "Oh, Tony told me about how you read him a bedtime story and
Yeah,
that's
and
his
he was
favorite."
like
I was like,
15. Like, what
"What?"
kind of 15-year-old like forget like a mobster son like goes to his guidance counselor and says, "When my mommy curled up with me and read a book."
Yeah, yeah,
Like that's
exactly.
what was he 15 or was he was 15? He was
I think it
older,
was
right?
17. He was
Okay, yeah, that was
yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah,
I
that was
hate
a
it.
little.
Was really a feminized liberalism. This love of psychiatry, the guy like with his mom, like needing his
Yeah,
mom. It was if, what happened to David Chase between it's what happened to liberalism like in the last 15 years, right? It's become really
yeah,
feminized. Really, like I didn't know like even leftists were like really into psychiatric drugs and like seeing it as backwards if like you don't want to take it. I didn't think that was like a mainstream like woke liberal idea, but somehow, yeah, somehow that's sort of the perspective of this show.
yeah. I mean, with Tony, so again, back to Many Saints. I think like returning to these sort of Freudian Oedipal themes, like Tony himself, like he's having these. They try to create, they try to make him into like this sort of sensitive young kid who just wants his mom to love him or to have a good relationship with his mom. And so that's you very clearly see him with this pamphlet. This was the ad for the psychiatric med. There's this pamphlet with a blonde woman who's like smiling and like literally glowing, and Tony like keeps carrying this pamphlet around. And I think for Tony, he just like he wants that to be his mom, like this happy positive woman full of love. And like Livia, I have to say, like the actor Vera Farmiga actually did a pretty good job playing Livia. um that was actually like one of the more like fun experiences, like to see her like capture, I think, pretty well like the mannerisms and the accent and everything of Livia Soprano, and just that sort of like utter like negativity
Yeah,
and like undercutting him was like really really well done. And so of course like Tony's like just trying to get these meds for her. He wants to have that like good relationship with the mom, and eventually Dickie does get those meds, right? Like at the very end,
yeah,
he gets the meds, and that this is when he's shot, and they someone says like, "Oh, they found pills in his pocket." um
yeah.
and I think like, so what's interesting is
Which
that
Livy
with
herself says, "Oh my God, I knew he was weak."
I knew he was weak. Yeah,
Yeah, something like that.
Jesus
Yeah,
Christ. And then but there was something interesting about that too. This is another sort of Sopranos Easter egg, is that Christopher Moltisanti, he had that whole arc with his addiction and rehab and struggles with drinking and everything. And I guess like it was just sort of like lore among like the crew and the sort of like Moltisanti and the Sopranos that Christopher's father was an addict. Like that was. Do you remember this? That like there was that
uh,
very
No, I
Like,
don't remember that.
it was referenced a couple of times. Like the most sort of striking example of this was when Tony and Christopher were speaking over, I think, over the barbecue grill, and Chris says something like, "Let's be honest, Tone. Like, my dad, the great Dickie Moltisanti, wasn't much more than a fucking
Oh
junkie." And
yeah,
Tony, like, he's kind of silent and taken aback by this because Dickie was Tony's hero as a kid growing up. And so so I remember that going into this movie, like, all right, so if the movie's going to be about Dickie Moltisanti, is his arc going to be similar to Chris's? Is he going to like start out with promise and then get addicted, or what? He was
right.
never addicted. He was never an addict. The
Yeah.
whole rumor of his addiction started because they found pills in his pocket. I think that was where the rumor
Wow,
started.
that's fascinating. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good
So
point.
so that's an interesting thing, right? But like, you have to like be deep in the Sopranos to understand that part of the movie, which most people aren't going to be. Um, but like, so I think like those, like, David Chase weaved in these sort of clever moments to like for like super fans of the show. But again, like, I think he was trying to do too much, and so it didn't quite make up for it.
Yeah. So going back to, I mean, to the other political thing. So you have the poor psychiatry thing. You have the BLM thing. Yeah, and then
Hmm.
the feminist thing we didn't talk about. So this Italian woman, she marries Dickie Maltesante, this younger, and she, like, she wants to, like, her dream, right, is to open some kind of a beauty
Like
salon, right?
yeah, I remember
Yeah,
that.
and so
Yeah.
that's her, and so that's her arc, right? She's came to this country, and now she got beaten by her husband, and now she wants to, like, be a businesswoman. Even, like, there's one scene where she's like with another woman in some kind of store or some kind of salon, and then she's like, I didn't want to be a nun. I wanted to be a priest so I could do whatever I wanted. It
Yeah.
was
Oh yeah,
so
yeah,
over the
yeah,
top.
yeah,
And then she goes and she sleeps with Harold, right, the black guy. Like, I don't think any woman is doing that in the mob in the 1970s, and, like, from a poor person from Italy, right? Like, that taboo violation, right, would have been so extreme for a woman in her position, right?
Well, she was shown to be a little bit kooky though from the beginning, right? Like, remember when she like kissed Dickie when she was still married to his
Oh yeah, yeah, that
dad?
was funny.
She
Yeah, she
was
was
like shown to
insane.
be a little off her rocker, but
Yeah.
yeah, I
So
mean,
this
like,
other scene, the
yeah,
combination of the feminism and the race stuff, where he's he's telling her, like, she's telling him, like, oh, the Italian guys, they don't want their woman to work. And he's like, baby, if you were my girl, you could work, all you want.
yeah,
and
yeah,
then and then she tells him, like, Dickie says that black man doesn't have the head for making money, and then he says, that's what we gonna find out, right? So it's like
yeah,
he's sleeping with the Italian man's girlfriend, Gomar, not his wife, and
yeah.
he's
Come on.
yeah, and he's gonna show him, he's gonna overcome his stereotypes, right? Like, one or two of those scenes is okay, but I found this again and again. It had these little feminist and these sort of race conscious themes, and yeah, people are
Yeah.
race conscious, but like, when like the view of race in, like, the Sopranos and the show was, like, you saw it through the Italian mob's eyes, right? You saw it through these guys' eyes. There wasn't really any black characters. You knew they were racist, and they had a view, and black people had this, they had these ideas about black people. They had their sort of role to play in their universe, right? This one is taking the 10,000 feet cosmic justice, like, liberal view of the race relations, right? Another scene
Hmm.
when he kills his dad, he's driving through the Newark riots, and the cops, he's got a dead body, right? And the cop is like, let him through, he's white, right? It's like, okay, like, he can get away with murder because he's white, he has all this white privilege. It's just, in a 2-hour movie, you have like 10, 15 of these things. I mean, I found it really, really over the top.
Yeah,
And
I,
just,
I wonder how much of this is like, how much of this was a conscious choice, like, well, especially like, given the events of the last 18 months or so, like, did David Chase want those scenes in there? Because like David Chase himself, I've listened to interviews with him where he has acknowledged that The Sopranos today couldn't be made.
yeah,
So I listened to the Talking Sopranos podcast, and David, they asked him, like, do you think The Sopranos could be made today? And David Chase said, like, no, like, I heard someone, basically one of the networks said they're not going to take any more pitches if the plots contain women who are trying to use sex to get what they want.
Wow.
And David Chase said, like, look, The Sopranos was all about people scheming and manipulating and doing everything they can to get what they want, the men and the women. And David Chase is clearly like well aware of like, shifts in the wind and changing times and whatever. And I don't think like Chase himself is like woke or anything, but I wonder if he had to like make concessions to get this film made, or if there
But I
were like
think,
other
yeah,
writers who wanted him to like implement these things, because it's just so out of character from like what we know about the series The Sopranos, and how like it never
yeah,
took these sort of like moralistic perspectives on race relations, like just like the Italians were like casually racist and that's just how it was, and there was no like
yeah.
like this didn't like there was no like sort of finger wagging about any of it in the show, whereas in the movie, like you said, there were a few of these. um well, something else that was so again, like so I've consumed like a lot of interviews, read a lot of stuff about this movie, and Alessandro Nivola, who plays Dicky Moltisanti, he had an interview where they asked him, how did you play this character, and he said something interesting, which was so Dicky himself, he said that he played him two different ways, interacting with the Harold character, the black guy.
Uh,
When it was just those two alone, Dicky was basically Harold's friend. Like there's that very opening scene where Harold's chasing, the young black kid, like the sort of
yeah,
low-level drug dealer, and then like
right.
Dicky catches up with Harold and offers him a cigarette, and they're basically buddies. But then later, the very next scene, they're in a scene together. Dicky's father is in the room in the back of the pork store. The dark table and all the guys are hanging out, and Harold drops by, and then Dicky is suddenly like a little bit colder towards Harold. And I guess the reason for this was that his dad was there, and so he
Mhm.
felt like he had to be like a little bit more
I thought he
cold
was nice. I thought
towards.
he was nice to him. I
Yeah,
thought I didn't think I thought he was fine. Didn't
yeah.
he? Didn't they talk about high school football or something?
I
Like, I
think
think they mentioned.
briefly.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
but
so.
I
Even in front of
think.
I think that was in front of everybody. I thought
Yeah,
they.
but then like Dicky Senior made like some kind of snide remark. Someone said something like kind of snide about it, and then and I think, yeah, Dicky he wasn't quite the same. I mean, he wasn't unfriendly towards Harold, but he wasn't like, he wasn't as close with him. But of course, like even Dicky himself, Dicky Junior, he was kind of well, he was very clearly shown. One of the things that's funny reading the critics review this is how frequently they have to talk about like, oh, Tony's evil racist father and Tony's evil racist uncle, and it was like that was the sort of typical attitude of like,
Yeah,
whoever, whatever like sort of like person back then in the 1970s.
yeah.
And then like, Dicky, after he murders, or when he's about to murder his Gumar for sleeping with Harold, he drops a racial slur. He's angry not just at the
Well, I
infidelity,
thought it
but the
was
fact
funny.
that she slept with a
You know what's
black
funny
guy.
about that scene? Because he goes, "You slept with that murdering," and then he says "N word," and then
Yeah.
the N word. He doesn't say N word. And it's funny because he put murdering as an adjective, which I think a racist Italian mobster wouldn't have hated him for being murdering. I think he would have
Yeah.
hated him for the race things. I think he would have emphasized that. So I think they soft pedaled the racism by saying that murdering N word rather than
Yeah.
just that N word. You know what I'm saying? Because Dicky
Yeah.
Maltesante, you still they still needed to. He was
Well,
still sort of a protagonist. He was still sort of a good guy. You're supposed to care about him, and that's hard to
yeah.
do when he's that racist. And so by calling him a murdering blank,
Yeah.
right, that let you like keep him as like as a quote unquote good guy. Because the other thing he does, he visits his uncle in prison and tries to do a good deed. So he's like supposed to be like struggling with this stuff, right? Sort of like Tony is, a generation
Yeah.
later.
I think, yeah, when he visits his uncle in prison, again played by Ray Liotta, but playing two characters after the
Oh
father
wait,
is
that was the
killed.
same guy.
Was it not? Was it not Ray
I don't
Liotta in
know. That
both?
would be a
I
weird thing
think it
to do.
was.
They looked alike,
Um,
but
I'm pretty sure, yeah. Ray Liotta plays both the father, and then Dicky kills the father, and then he goes to visit his uncle, who looks very much like the father. It's the same actor, I'm pretty sure, Ray Liotta. Ray Liotta played like. So I mean, it's kind of interesting. Like they needed some kind of like moral center in the movie, I guess. And Ray Liotta. So like
yeah,
in the Sopranos show, basically everyone in the Sopranos is like amoral at best, right? Like sort of like scheming, like criminals, whatever. Even like the sort of bystanders like Carmela are sort of like complicit in all these crimes. And
yeah,
Melfi was like the sort of moral center of the show, like sort of she was like the audience surrogate for like the sort of upper middle class HBO subscribing viewer to like
Mhm.
their way into this world. And I think they didn't really have that this time for the movie, but Ray Liotta, the character, the uncle, he was seen to be like the way that they like the attributes they gave him to make him that way of like, we should trust this guy, he's a wise person, is you know, the jazz records, you know, he's
Yeah.
like, bring me some jazz
Oh, that's
records.
funny.
And then
That's
he's like,
funny.
he
Yeah.
brings him like, okay, so he listens to jazz, so I guess that makes him cool, and like, you know, we should, you know, he's like, whatever, even though he's a murdering prisoner, he's still like, he listens to
Yeah.
jazz,
He's
so he's got
converted
to
to
be a good
Buddhist.
guy.
He's become a Buddhist. He's become
Yeah,
like,
he
he's
talks
become
about
very like,
Buddhism, and like he's picky about what jazz he listens to. Like Dickie brings him a few records, and he like picks, you know, one of the jazz records and says, take these other two away. You know, he openly acknowledges like, well, what do I know, I'm a murderer, and tells him to stay away from Tony. And like, yeah, but there was like that scene where Dickie goes to visit him in prison, and then like, I guess his mind starts to wander, and then suddenly the uncle is gone. Do you remember this scene where he kind of looks up and there's no one there in the prison room, like in the visiting area? And I
no,
wondered, like, was that meant to convey that, like, did this uncle actually exist? Or was that just like Dickie so sort of under stress with these sort of like the internal war waging within him of like, you know, trying to be good, but also like trying to become a good sort of whatever
so
mob captain or
he was
something?
at the prison. He was at the prison, and he looks up, and the uncle is not there.
Right, exactly. Yeah, he looks up. I think he like, I can't
I
remember
completely
exactly
missed
what
that.
he
I
was
completely
daydreaming.
missed that.
I think he
I
was
did not see
daydreaming
that.
about coaching little league for the deaf
Oh, the
kids or
blind
something,
kids.
or the blind kids.
Yeah,
Yeah, he
there's a
looks up, he's thinking about it, he looks up, and the uncle's not there anymore,
Oh,
and
he's
he
not
sort of
there
like looks
anymore.
around. Yeah, and that was like a weird scene where like, is that sort of like trying to like make it ambiguous about whether the uncle even
He's not
exists, and is
daydreaming.
this,
He's telling the uncle about it. He's telling
or
him
is he?
about the. I thought he was telling him.
Yeah, but
Um,
it's, well, he's sort of like showing the images of
yeah,
him with these kids, and then it
right.
returns to him sort of telling the story, and he looks up, and the uncle's gone, and you know, is that just sort of like, you know, Dickie getting lost in his own thoughts, or is that the uncle not really existing?
Right.
Um, which I don't know. I don't know if I would like that, if that was just sort of like a figment the entire time, or if this is just one of those things that, you know, David Chase is never going to reveal, which is the right answer with the interpretation of this.
Yeah, how does that? I
So
mean, how does that work? Because in the Sopranos in the show, they're always dreaming of stuff, right? And their dreams, nobody's imagining things, right? No one's imagining like I mean, I
no one
think that's some kind.
hallucinates.
Yeah, no one hallucinates, right? And
Yeah.
that's a pretty strange hallucination. I don't know if hallucinations like that exist, where you're having like a relationship with like. I think I had something like this when I was like a kid. I think I had an old man I used to talk to, but I
Like an
think I was always
imaginary friend.
I think I was always half dreaming. I think it was like it was something that would always happen at night. So I think I was dreaming when this
Yeah.
happened.
So
Um,
that was just like a weird like aspect of like, you know, that inner, like that relationship between Dickie and his uncle. But well, something else that was that does connect back to the series that they did in this show, and I'm curious what you thought about this like little plot device. Very like throughout the movie, but very in the opening scene, you hear Christopher Moltisanti speaking from beyond the dead, right?
right.
He's in the grave, and you hear him talk about like, you know, oh, the little fat kid, that's my uncle, and he's sort of like narrating with his
Yeah,
voiceover.
yeah,
And I guess this is supposed to indicate that, so one of the things about the series was like this question hanging over it about like whether this like the supernatural exists in the Sopranos universe. Do ghosts exist? Is there like an element of something like beyond this world? And there were like a couple of weird scenes in the series. One was when Tony, or not Tony, Polly visits that psychic. Do you remember? Polly goes to that psychic. It's like a rube, like a clairvoyant or something. There's like this
uh,
people sitting in a circle. Polly goes to visit, and this guy who says he's a psychic starts like describing these guys Polly killed in his past, you know, in his past, like, you know, what about this guy, and he names him, talks about what he was wearing when Polly killed him, and Polly freaks out, and he was like, this is twisted black magic shit, you fucking queers. And he starts like throwing chairs around.
Wait,
um
what? No,
yeah,
I didn't know this. This wasn't
I
a
think this
dream.
was
This
in
was
the
a real thing that
this
happened.
was a real thing that happened in the series. I think the first or second season. I don't know how Polly ends up there.
I gotta go back
Yeah,
and watch this because I don't remember
yeah.
that. I don't
I mean, if you
remember
just,
that.
I'm sure it's, this scene is hilarious. I'm sure it's on YouTube, but Polly just like freaks out and like starts like throwing chairs because he thinks that like they're doing satanic black magic. Um,
I think I would have
and
remembered that because I would have. I'm conscious usually to that stuff, like whether the supernatural exists in a universe. I still remember Game of Thrones when I first discovered the supernatural exists was when the Melisandre kills who does she kill? What's his name? Anyway, King Robert's brother who was trying. So I remember that was the first time I realized supernatural actually does exist in this world. It's not just like a medieval
Yeah.
village or something.
Yeah, well, it's very subtle in The Sopranos. So I mean, there was that scene with Paulie, and then the second scene is where I can't remember what season or the specifics, but basically, I think Tony closes a door, and there's a mirror on the door. Tony closes it and walks away, but in the mirror, you see a pussy, Big Pussy's image, like he's basically standing there. And this was after Tony and his guys killed Pussy. So this was like the later season 5 or something when this happened. Tony closes the door and Pussy's standing there, and it's very quick. It's like a 1 to 2 second shot, and like that scene made Sopranos fans go crazy over
Well, that
what
could
that
have been.
meant.
Oh yeah, well that could have been a a hallucination, not a real hallucination. Like this
Well,
is a
no one saw it
hallucination.
though. This wasn't Tony seeing it. No one saw it. It was just Tony closed the door, walks away, and Big Pussy standing there as Tony's walking away. And
Oh
so, is
really?
this like some people speculated that this was basically like Big Pussy's ghost haunting Tony, like sort of following him around, or like basically like yeah, there's or it could have just been I don't know exactly what, but people basically think that like this is a suggestion that like the afterlife exists in The Sopranos
Well, it
somehow, and
has
of
to,
course
right?
like there's all
That
the
seems.
dream sequences.
I missed this. So
Um,
this is so this was. I mean, that seems conclusive, right? Assuming
yeah,
that as you
and
described.
so like yeah, and so in many Saints, like Christopher's like his ghost, I guess, is telling
Yeah.
us this
Well, but I
story.
mean, yeah, that settles it, right? The fact that his ghost exists, right? I was gonna say,
Uh,
yeah, I was gonna say that there is no supernatural in this, or like no more than this universe, which because that's what I thought because I didn't know about those two scenes you just mentioned, or I missed them. I don't know how I missed that, but especially the Polly one seems like I would have remembered that. But yeah, so Chris is still exists in some form. I guess
mm.
he's it's yeah, that is strange, right?
Does
So
that mean that
what
go
is
like because he like because he's talking about like the fat kid is my uncle, he's gonna grow up to kill me, something like that. So this suggests that like not only do ghosts exist, but like Christopher's ghost can travel back in time and like re sort of narrate
Yeah, he
everything. Like
knows all this stuff. He knows
I
his
thought it
dad
was.
had the thing in his pocket, and that's why he's a junkie. He found that
What
all
did
out
you
after
think
he died.
about that though? Like, what did you think about like them bringing back Michael Imperioli as Christopher to like
I
just like
thought,
voice over?
yeah, I must not. I mean, I was not happy with it. I mean, I thought it was. Yeah, I mean, I went in with the idea that the supernatural just doesn't exist in this universe. But you're telling me it exists. But the way you say it is like it's sort of mysterious whether it exists, and it exists in ways that like we don't understand as humans. This is like he's thinking like he's a still. It's like a very like a cartoonish kind of supernatural world, right? He's like, oh, that's the guy who killed me. Oh, this is the old
Yeah.
neighborhood. I'm gonna
I
take you on
hated
this
that.
tour.
I
Yeah,
hated that so much. Like I hated that opening. Like I mean, I heard that this was going to happen, and I was like, oh man, like I hope they know what they're doing by by using that because they didn't have to. They didn't have to.
yeah.
They could have found another way to sort of very briefly reintroduce us to these characters, and even the way that they did it was silly. Um, I guess like did they just want to bring someone back from the original series into The Sopranos somehow, and this was like their way of doing it?
Because they gave him
But
a voice. I mean, that's it. Because
yeah,
his voice was there.
and like yeah, it was like he opened it, he said a few words about like what's gonna happen, and then he comes back briefly, and then he never comes back again, right? Like you never hear Christopher sort of like
Was he at the
narrating,
end?
and so
Did he say anything at the end?
I don't
No,
think he
no.
said anything like after the
When they
midway
pinky
point.
swear together, him
Yeah,
and the ghost of uh
right. Dickie or
yeah,
yeah.
Dickie's dead body, right?
Yeah, I thought that was so silly. And like, yeah, like if they're going to go with the voiceover, then fine. Then couldn't Christopher have sort of like, lampshaded or like sort of highlighted? Okay, well, this is this is how my uncle got into the mob life or like whatever. Like he just sort of like makes a couple comments here and there and then goes away. So like again, like it seemed like non-committal. They didn't know what they wanted from this movie. Like it was like not quite finished or something. Like yeah, they try to yeah, just that device totally fell flat for me. Um,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
what do you think? So you I mean you follow like you listen to the podcast Talking Sopranos. I just watch the shows. I don't follow the a lot of these sort of larger discussions. What do you think? because I watch a show and I watch this, and it's hard for me to believe they were made by the same person. I mean, one is just so good, and one is just, just so terrible and pedantic and political and not very interesting. And you said, maybe he's trying to just like make the critics like, okay, like, but why is he doing that at his, is he just an egotist? He just wants to hear the critics say he's a great guy, or is he, people genuinely become woke. I mean, the last 10, 15 years, it's happened to a lot of people. It's made them more political and thinking about these things, these race and gender issues. And I think it's made them less interesting and complex people just because these ideas are just so bad, and to adopt it you have to sort of have this very simplistic view of the universe. But a lot of people have gone that way, right? People, liberals who might have 10, 15, 20 years ago been reasonable people are now insane thanks to wokeness. So what do you think is happening with David Chase? What explains the difference between Sopranos and the Many Saints of Newark?
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, a big one is that David Chase is much older, so he's 76 years old. And I
Losing his
think,
mind?
I don't think he's losing
He's
his
not as
mind.
sharp as he used to be.
I mean, I mean, just, inevitably that's going to be the case, right? Like if you compare someone in their 50s versus 70s, there's going to be
Sopranos
like,
ended what, like 2007, the original?
2007. Yeah, so that was 14 years ago. And yeah, and so like clearly there's going to be some cognitive decline between that, those specific decades especially. But also I think like it's also possible, like, beyond the political stuff, is that I think a lot of like older guys, like older creators, maybe like they get this fear that they're out of touch. And
Yeah.
so like I think maybe like David just like consulted too many people. Maybe he was consulting younger people about like, how do I make this more relevant? Or like, how do I make this sort of like capture the spirit of the times, even though it's taking place in the 70s? Like, how do I make it like more interesting to young people? Like, getting that sort of target demo, like, who do you want as a filmmaker? Who do you want going out to the movies? And it's, isn't it something like the target demo is 18 to 34 year olds? Like, those are the people who you want. That's, that's sort of your
Is that how
target.
an artist thinks? I mean, that's
Yeah.
disappointing if an artist thinks like that, right?
I don't know, but I think like that's like one possible explanation, is that David Chase was not like thinking about how to be true to the series or to his vision or something, but he just wanted to like, I mean, again, like he said multiple times, like, I wanted to make a really good gangster movie, him and his co-author or co-creator or whatever, but like they failed. Like it wasn't a good gangster movie. They could have made one. I think David Chase still had it in him to make a good gangster movie, but yeah, yeah, just like riffing on your point here about like why introduce all this weird political stuff, and introduce this character that no one had ever heard of and is not in any way connected to the original series.
Yeah, yeah. That all makes sense. There's no good answer that's not gonna make you very disappointed in David
Yeah.
Chase, I guess. Um, yeah, I mean, right. I mean, like you could have like 20 years ago, 15 years, you could have like a series that just didn't have black people at all, right? Or did not have their
Like
you know,
Friends.
well, no. Even the Sopranos, they didn't have like a black friend. If it was made today, like there's like 20 things, 100 things that would have been different, right? One of them, Tony would have had like some old black football buddy that he kept in touch with, and maybe like the other guys would have been racist to him, and then like Tony would have like acted different or something. Like that experience has to be represented, right? There's a lot of shows about black people, black gangsters, and that's fine. But now it has to be incorporated into everyone else's story, right? Um, and yeah, and so like yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating. I mean, you have to, people are watching this in the future. I mean, I think it really is the difference between, art is always has a message. It's always political to a certain extent. Uh, but I think that the difference between the show and the movie is just that there was some threshold we crossed in the last decade, where just everything is hyper politicized, and you could see like the difference between even The Wire, like the way The Wire was made. I mean, like it wasn't like they were always shoving it down your throat that it was like white privilege that was like doing this. Like The Wire is a show specifically about black people and inner city blacks and their struggles. And even that was nowhere close to the lecturing tone of this, sort of the Sopranos movie about like, there's no scenes of like obvious white privilege. I mean, there's, obviously, that like, they have unique different, like for example, like the way the Newark riot starts. You said it was based on a true story. Like if you look at these riots, the stories are never this clear cut, right? Because the cab driver doesn't do anything. He just takes a wrong turn. The two white cops take him out, just start beating him, right? And that's like how liberals think it happens. But like these stories, if you look into them, they never start out like that. Usually the guy is like doing something very bad. But like that doesn't happen in like The Wire. It does happen when there's the black guy. There was this one sadistic like black cop who, remember, he like takes the kid's fingers and he like twists them back. That's the only thing like close to it, where like a cop is just sadistically beating someone, and it's a black cop in that case, right? But no, in this show, it's just so black and white that like black and white, no pun intended. Like the black guy is just like completely innocent, gets beat. Then the rioters, right? The police shoot the rioters, which I think they might have used to do. I don't know if that's if they used to actually do that, but the message is they're just shooting kids, and the police are just beating them, and there's there's no greater complexity than that, right? It's all just righteous anger when the hood goes up in flames. No concern about the people who's like lose their stores or businesses or lose their lives or get killed by other rioters or victims of black on black crime, right? No, that doesn't exist here. It's just so political, and it's just so one sided, and I'm disappointed. I don't think like.
There's a similar show. Well, there's a similar scene in a show, recent show. I think it was made this year, last year, called Your Honor, which is the new Bryan Cranston Showtime series. So this is like Bryan Cranston's sort of like big return to like a big show after Breaking Bad. Now he plays a judge in the show Your Honor, and there's a scene in that series as well of like this sort of very blatant police brutality towards like a basically like a completely innocent black kid. And it was like I think like you're saying, like there is like an audience for that, like who wants to believe that that's how it goes down. It's never gray. There's never any sort of like moral ambiguity or complexity. Like and like I think it does sort of like it makes people maybe feel like good to experience that kind of righteous anger, but also like I almost wonder how controversial it would be, not among viewers, but among like sort of critics and like the sort of cultural elites and intelligentsia, if like, if like Many Saints depicted or any sort of like, HBO or Showtime series depicted a more like realistic sort of, or something closer to true life.
Yeah,
of
like nobody in the show is ever victimized by crime, right? In the internet, you have the white flight, right? But you have the burning down the cities, but the burning down cities is always because the cops were just sadistic and did something evil, right? But there's no like, there's no idea that like there's actually crime in these communities, in these neighborhoods, and like people who live close by tend to react to that, right? There's just nothing. It's just there's these innocent, right, black people, and they're going about their lives, and they're just
which itself is sort of like dehumanizing or sort of flattening. Right, like whether you view someone as all good or all bad, you're sort of stripping them of their humanity, and like which is one thing that The Wire did so well.
There's no truly evil black character. I mean, there's only a few black characters, but there's the Harold, his friend who gets killed, who gets the tire. I thought that tire scene was cool when they put that thing in his mouth. I thought that was old. That was really old school.
Oh right, yeah, that was rough, man.
That was brutal. That was So those are the only two black characters, and none of them are that bad. They're criminals. They're as sympathetic as criminals can be. And then the wife, and he's got like a wife or girlfriend or whatever.
Well, I guess like none of the mob characters were like flat out. Well, actually, arguably, like okay, so now we can talk about Junior actually, but
Montesanti's dad, I think, was supposed to be sort of
sort of a villain, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, if he kicked his mistress or his wife down the steps, which is I guess like to a modern viewer that would be seen as like
but he's not. I mean, he's not good. He doesn't seem very nice or good in really other ways either. But you don't see him being generous. He's just like this. Old man who does what he wants, and Junior,
sort of selfish. So Junior. Well, okay, so like, first of all, I thought I think everyone else was like pretty well cast. Like, regardless of the sort of shortcomings of the movie, I think like most of the characters were well cast. I thought Alessandro Nivola was good as Dickie. I thought Gandolfini was, the young Gandolfini was good as a young Tony. And of course, like Livia was great, but the guy who played Junior, like I forgot his name. Like he was in like House of Cards and like I don't know, a couple of other shows. I don't remember his name, but like he was not a good Junior. Like first of all, he was too tall, and like his facial features didn't like the way he like sort of spoke didn't match either. I don't know. He just was not a good Junior. They could have found someone better to play him. But then, so the character himself, like, I found it interesting. Well, first of all, sort of along these political lines, I kind of think they retconned Junior Soprano into being gay.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what you
and there
said.
was
Yeah.
there were
Well,
sort of two scenes
let's
that
go back
stood
to the
out to
original.
me.
So in the original
Yeah.
Sopranos, what was the story as to why Junior had he been was he a widower?
He
Was there any story about why he wasn't married?
I don't
He did
recall. I
have a
don't
girlfriend. He did have
He
that
had a
girlfriend. Remember?
girlfriend, so that was interesting. So there was like actually the whole reason in season one why Junior and arguably Livia, although that's made to be ambiguous, tried to have Tony killed, is because of that sort of personal feud started by Tony making fun of Junior for going down on his girlfriend. Remember, like the whole like there was
Oh,
that scene too. Yeah,
was that in response to that? I thought that was later.
yeah.
Okay.
That was the beginning of this sort of like tension between Junior and Tony in season one. And then Tony has that sort of funny scene with Carmela where he was like, psychiatry and cunnilingus brought us to this. And so yeah, in Tony or Junior is never married in the series. He was never married before. It's never made clear why. I don't think he never had children. There were sort of signs that had always been interested in women. When Tony visits his father's former Gumar, the woman who claimed to have slept with JFK,
Hmm.
she mentioned like, oh yeah, Corrado, he would always chase me around and call me, but I was more in love with your father. She said something like that. So basically saying like Junior was like chasing her around when they were younger. Um, but then so then in the movie Many Saints, like there were two scenes that were kind of weird. One was I guess like Junior's girlfriend left him and all the guys were sort of making fun of him or something like, yeah, your girlfriend left you, something like that. um and then
Yeah, she was with
and
another
then
guy. Well, I don't know if
yeah,
she
she
left him, but she was
cuckolded
with
him
another.
or something.
He was with
And
another
like,
guy, and
yeah, and
they
then they
ended
were
up.
like, why aren't you more upset about this? Like basically sort of like giving him shit for like not being upset that his girlfriend left him for another guy. And then there was the scene after Junior falls down the steps and everyone, Dickie and I guess other people sort of laugh at him, but like Dickie, like it's very, sort of Dickie laughs at Junior. He falls down the steps and then he's injured, and then Dickie's with his Gumar, his girlfriend or whatever, and he like is unable to perform, and she says any excuse not to fuck.
Yeah,
And is that like meant to indicate that like Junior often makes excuses to not have sex?
yeah.
Like it's not clear cut that Junior is portrayed as gay, but there are enough like weird like I think those
Well, the
two
fact that he
signs.
doesn't. I mean, the fact that they make fun of him. I mean, that's a stretch. They make fun of him because his girl was with another guy. I guess that's that seems like a little bit of a stretch. Yeah, the other scene is hard to explain. When
Like
he
any
goes.
excuse not to fuck, but he's clearly injured. So like I don't
Hey,
think
well,
any girl would
that
be
excuse seems legitimate.
like, yeah, like okay, he's injured, but then if he has used excuses before the injury, then is that meant to
Yeah,
convey that like he's and so then maybe they tried to tie this in with the season one um arc of Junior being, one of the jokes was that Junior was especially talented at cunnilingus, right? He would go down on his girlfriend and then she was the one who bragged about how good Junior was, which is how Carmela found out and told
yeah,
Tony about it. And so is this like one of those things where like, well, Junior can't perform as a man,
yeah.
and so he goes down on his girlfriend instead, and this is sort of like how he develops his reputation as a ladies man to sort of cover for his sexual orientation or something. I don't know, but like is this, because like one thing that sort of like makes me reluctant to just sort of say like yes they made him gay is because I think that if they wanted Junior to be gay, they would have been more blatant about it the way that they were about the racial
Yeah,
stuff and the sort of
they would
feminist
have had
stuff.
an
They
yeah.
would have
There
like
was
had
missing an
Junior like
LGBT.
had a weird like Junior has like a secret boyfriend or something. Like they would have been they would have been more blatant about it, I think, but
Well, maybe they're
I don't
saving
know.
the LGBT angle for the next
They're
prequel,
gonna make a
right?
Junior Soprano movie,
Yeah, that's what
him
I'm afraid
like
of.
going to the
Because I was
Tenderloin and
wondering where you have the feminist and you have the black thing, you don't have an LGBTQ storyline anywhere, and maybe this is just sort of the next step, and the Sopranos just being completely checking every box. I don't know, like
yeah,
I that's my fear. I don't
yeah.
like. You're right. It doesn't. That scene. where he says, she says any excuse, not to have sex. Like there's no other explanation. Like nobody knows like why that excuse would be there. Like why would he be making excuses all the time?
It's just a very odd line, right? Like they didn't need to be put in there. And like, one thing that we know about the series, and I think even in this movie, I
I mean,
think is that no line is an accident.
Huh?
Like like there's no dialogue that's an accident, right? Like every piece of dialogue means something, right? It has to carry the story forward or convey some kind of important information. And
Yeah.
it's not a throwaway line, I don't think.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the fact that Junior kills right Dicky Maltasante at the end would indicate that we're going to get more Junior. This Junior guy who you don't like might be starring in another movie for what happens next, and they can bring back James Gandolfini's son to play Tony at every age. I hope not. That would suck.
I thought that,
right, because this sucks, and I don't want to see any more of this crap.
I thought that like the arc, with Dickie, you see him at the end getting the TV trays, and then he gets killed in the driveway, and of course, like the whole movie. So this is like a sort of classic, I think, David Chase sort of like subversion is like he leads you to think that the plot is going one way, and then he like sort of changes it and sort of like undercuts your expectation, and in a sort of like novel and clever way, I think, where like the movie builds up. They're trying, you're led to think that like Harold or one of his guys is after Moltisanti, and then he's killed, and so you think like, oh, so Harold is the reason why Dicky Moltisanti died. It wasn't, because remember in the Sopranos series, Tony takes Christopher to kill that police officer and says, that's the guy who killed your dad. Do you remember this? They drive up to that restaurant, and the guys were the police officer in the restaurant's wearing a sombrero, and Christopher's like looking at him like with anger. He's like, that's the guy who killed my dad.
He breaks into his house, right? He breaks into his house.
Breaks into the house, like handcuffs him to the stairwell, and turns the TV up and shoots him. And the whole time the cop is yelling at him like, what? Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. You're being set up. And Christopher, in like this sort of moment of clarity or maybe sadness, he says like, even if you aren't the guy, I still have to do it, right? Like basically, I'm resigned to this life. Whether or not you killed my dad, I still have to kill you. Like that's basically what he says. But then you learn like, okay, so Tony was manipulating Christopher in that scene. It wasn't the cop who killed Dicky Moltisanti. It was Harold or one of his guys. And then later you learn that it was actually Junior who felt belittled and humiliated when Dicky laughed at him, and probably for other reasons too. I would imagine, like, Dicky is sort of like this handsome mobster with like, he's got a wife, he's got this Gumar, he's sort of like the guy who's got it all going on for him, and Junior is constantly sort of belittled by the guys and kind of like treated not very nicely, and so he used whatever he decided to have Dicky killed in that way, which is kind of like an interesting thing that like Junior is like responsible for basically the entire series of The Sopranos, right? Like he's responsible for Tony becoming a mobster, because like Dicky was trying, toward the end, Dicky was trying to like basically cut Tony off.
No, but Dicky was bringing him back. Dicky's told Sil, tell Tony come in tomorrow morning at like whatever.
Oh, but wasn't that just to give him the pills for the mom?
No,
no?
Oh, only to give him no, because I think it was like. Well, I mean, maybe. I mean, that would have to be, that's one interpretation. But no, Sil was trying to. He's like, he worships you. Cares. Well, maybe it was to tell him to, finally go away. But I thought it was like, okay, we're gonna have him in this life. That's fine. Yeah. That's what I thought it was, to give him the pills, right? He could have given him the pills anyway, right? He didn't need to be convinced by Sil.
I mean, it could have been both, right? Well, it's of course it's it's meant to be ambiguous what the intention there was, I think, but like arguably, Junior is the reason why this all kicked off, because once Dicky's dead, Tony feels like some weird like obligation to him, number one, and then number two is like, he doesn't have anyone looking out for him anymore. Like that, I guess that was one of the sort of underlying themes, is like Tony's surrounded by bad male role models, like his dad's kind of like a not very bright and kind of like whatever, just like not a good role model. Went to prison for a while, which is like when you see Tony started to get into trouble and skipping school and selling or like cheating on his geometry tests and whatever, is like when his dad goes away to prison. You see Tony getting into trouble, and then Dicky's kind of trying to look out for him, but then also like telling him to take these stolen speakers. Like, also not the ideal father figure
Yeah, I
either.
think Tony was going to be a thug. I mean, I think he was going to be a thug no matter what. I
He
mean, I think
thinks,
it was just
well, I
he was
mean, I
too
think
good at
it's.
it. I
I think it
mean,
was trying to be sort of like the show,
well, he
the
was only
movie
didn't want to
was.
be when he threw away his speakers. You know,
Mm,
it was only because he was rejected by it. Wasn't it? It was because Dickie didn't like told him to go. Dickie was so like he wanted like I think you naturally want the approval of these guys. I mean, the mafia is cool, right? I mean, it's very
yeah,
cool at this time, and like
right.
that's your family, and like he's like big and he's tough. I mean, he's ideally suited, right, for
Yeah.
that
Well,
kind
I
of
think
life.
it's meant to be sort of like the movie's trying to tell us that Tony didn't necessarily have to go down that path. Maybe he would have anyway. I mean, clearly he did. And like, I think like, yeah, even if Dickie had lived, there's a good chance he would have, but there was a possibility that he didn't have to with like, there, of course, there's the scene where, we finally have confirmed
IQ,
evidence that Tony has a high IQ. He took the Stanford Binet, a legitimate IQ test, and scored high. Although Livia is reluctant to believe it because
yeah,
Tony only has like a D plus average or something,
yeah,
and then yeah, the school counselor also mentions this like bullshit personality test of the Myers Briggs and like, oh, Tony's a leader or whatever, which like the test itself is totally bullshit,
was it
but I guess
Myers
like
Briggs?
Tony
Well, I mean,
himself,
I don't think David Chase knows that. I mean, David Chase still believes
yeah,
in Freud, so I don't
yeah.
think he knows whether the Myers Briggs has been discredited. I don't think he's
Yeah,
keeping up with
yeah,
the
but
replication crisis.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
a lot of I
I
think
don't
a
even
lot of
think
those like
Myers Briggs is so outdated that I don't even know if it was involved in the replication. Like, it's such an old
no,
kind
but
of, but like,
Freud is even
yeah,
older. I mean,
but
the
at
Freudian
least,
stuff.
yeah, but at the least we know that David Chase is, he's sort of based on IQ research. He's sort of, he's not an IQ denier.
He's got that. Well, it's
Yeah.
because he's very old. It's like I think his view of psychology is too old to like get into the IQ denial, right? It's like before like the
before
1980.
before the
Yeah,
bell curve, like,
it's like 100 years old, right? Freud
yeah,
and like the Freudian stuff is not it's not taken seriously by anyone, right?
yeah,
And so Freud, I think, goes out of fashion in like real psychiatry before like IQ becomes taboo, right? I mean, I think
yeah,
in the
yeah.
19, I think people start being against IQ and like after the
But I
Civil
think
Rights Act.
what's funny is that like this, for all the debates and stuff about IQ, I think that one line, like depending on how popular this movie becomes, that one line will be enough to sort of like get a young generation of people interested in what IQ is, right? Like Tony Soprano is high IQ. Let me look into IQ and what it is, and like could potentially like, I don't know, red pill a bunch of young kids on
No,
this.
people know
But
it.
anyway,
People,
yeah,
I think IQ, denying IQ is, I think, a very highbrow thing.
nah.
I don't think the
What's
average person doubts IQ, doubts intelligence is real.
Oh, well,
I think
they
it's a,
don't doubt it, but they could be like potentially sort of like, I don't know, they could look into it and become inoculated from all like the sort of denialism. But anyway, so anyway, back to but like so he got the high IQ. He's apparently like a leader or whatever. He's got the Letterman jacket. He plays
yeah,
football. Like
the
he had a
leader thing. I
shot,
thought it was supposed to be legitimate because like he does end up being a great leader. So you're supposed to
right?
believe the Myers Briggs is real. I think is the point of that.
Yeah. Well, I don't even think it's really about the test. It's more just to like indicate that like Tony's a smart guy. He has potential. He's got leadership qualities. He could have like if possibly if he had different people around him, if he wasn't sort of like enmeshed or sort of ensconced in this mafia life, he could have been someone else. But like because of his family, because of who he is and where he grew up, like like there's that scene where he's with Melfi and he says like you're born into this shit, you are what you are, like that's just, there's no changing your fundamental nature. And I think like there may be some some truth to that. That the Sopranos, the series itself, sort of took this stance that you're sort of born with a criminal disposition or you're not. um there's that scene where like AJ almost kills Junior, and then Tony like yells at AJ saying like it's not in your nature, like this isn't who you are, whereas
Yeah,
basically saying like I am that person, like I am in my soul, I'm a murderer.
yeah.
But then like the movie tries to like soften him up a little bit, I guess, and like either it's trying to like say that Tony was wrong and that he could have been someone else, or it's sort of like whatever, David Chase changed his mind since then and is now trying to like
Yeah,
whatever, like
yeah. I mean, I
recast
think there
Tony
was
as a
so much
different kind of
focused on
person.
the racial stuff that there wasn't even like
You don't
there's
think
not
they gave it
much to
enough
go.
thought?
There's not much. Yeah, there's not much to go on. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, one of my favorite things from The Sopranos, I think, I think it was more skeptical of psychiatry because at one point, like he's like attracted to Melfi and he keeps hitting on her and he keeps saying, he wants to be with her, and she says, "Oh, I'm like your mother or something." He's like, "What is it? I'm a man, you're a woman. Like, it's that simple." And it's like I think Tony is obviously
End
right.
of
Like,
story.
yeah, you do not need like a complex psychological theory as to why a man would like a woman, right? And so, there was a lot of scenes like that, or the one with we talked about this before with the where they're talking about AJ, and that they're like, which is it? Should we discipline him or does he have a disease, right? And they're like, sort of like both. He's talking about these sort of the incoherence in what the guidance counselor or whatever is like, whoever the psychiatrist, guidance counselor, whoever it is in the show. And so there's like this pushback against the psychiatric worldview, right? Here,
Yeah.
it's just like the expert. It's like trust the experts. It's like a Fauci, like kind of liberalism, right? It's like, oh, they gave him an IQ test. That's real. They gave him Myers-Briggs. That's real too. Oh, the drugs are good. You have to take the drugs or you're going to live a miserable life. It's like
Well, I don't know if it completely buys it though, because Livia herself said, like, basically is skeptical. She's
but
like, I don't,
she's a miserable character. She's a miserable
yeah,
character who dies miserably, right? I mean, so it's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
so yeah. I mean, you don't want to be Livia. I don't think that's like
You don't want to take her opinion about,
she's not the fountain of wisdom, right? She's like
yeah.
the most miserable person in the world, and she rejects like using the drugs.
Yeah.
So yeah,
There's less ambiguity in some ways about like a lot of this stuff about like, yeah, it takes a more sort of like hardline view about like, basically like more moralistic, and takes on a sort of like
right on
more
everything, not
liberal
just race and
establishment
sex. Yeah,
view.
I mean, it's really
I wonder if like, well, I don't know. I don't know exactly like what it could be. It's all like, yeah, I guess it's just sort of the era and the times and
it's
whatever.
the resistance era liberalism, and all their
Yeah.
brains have just become mush, and they just worship expertise and have this black and white view of race and gender. And I think that's all there is to it. It's
Well,
unfortunate.
so one thing that was sort of back to the end of the movie Many Saints is when you see, well, I guess we could just sort of talk about in these last this last little bit of space that we have, is that like to talk about the young Tony and sort of like what do we think about him. Like, I don't know, like his storyline was like basically non-existent. Like, you see him like sort of getting into mischief with his friends. They like, whatever, they beat up the Mr. Softy man, which is
Yeah, and
that's
I
how
don't think,
Tony's dad puts it.
and that's like sort of seen as like no big deal, but like I mean that's a pretty like to carjack, the ice cream man. I mean, shows a certain disposition, right? And
Yeah.
it's supposed to be like innocent and funny, but like no, it seems like a serious crime.
Yeah, because
But
they're not making money, right? Like they were, like, that was one of the things I think that was tried to show that like it wasn't that serious, is that they
that
were
seems
giving the
worse.
ice cream
I mean,
away.
that seems worse.
They weren't
Just
trying to make money.
do it for the thrill.
Yeah.
But
Well, they were they're giving the ice cream away, and like what like, well, I think Tony's trying, like, he didn't want to steal the speakers. He was whatever.
yeah,
He's trying
that's
to get
true.
the meds for the mom. He didn't want to, like, yeah. He was like, oh yeah. He
By the
even
way,
said
didn't he
like,
have another
I'm trying
sister?
to go to
Didn't he have another
college.
sister besides Janice? What happened to that other sister?
I don't. Oh, was she around? I thought there was like a younger. There was like a little girl.
Was
Very
that?
briefly.
I thought the other sister was supposed to be older.
No, I think she's supposed to be younger, right?
Oh,
I
I
don't
don't
even know.
know.
They always were like kind of coy about that I think they wanted to do something with her in the early seasons of The Sopranos, and then
She
like
shows
realized
up.
that the
Doesn't she show up when Livia dies? Is that when she shows
like
up? She
very
shows up.
briefly, she has like a 15 seconds sort of thing. I think like they wanted to have like a bigger sort of family, but then they realized that the real action and chemistry was between Tony and Janice, and then like the other sister became an afterthought. There was another kind of inconsistency here, which is that like a big sort of point of contention between Tony and Janice in the series is how when Tony was 16, Janice left when she was 18 years old. She left to go to Berkeley and like go live her hippie lifestyle in Seattle and stuff, and left Tony like basically like to be tortured by Livia by himself.
Uh-huh.
And you're sort of like led to believe that so much of Tony's anger and rage towards Janice is because she left him there alone when they were teenagers. But then
Is that what you're supposed to believe? I mean, that's so incomprehensible to me that a guy who has Tony's intelligence, leadership potential, right, is like an adult, and he's still like living in fear of his mom. I just don't think that the world does
Oh
not
no
work
no
like
no
that.
no! Like there was that scene where like, I mean, it was like one of the best, I think, like sort of portrayals from James Gandolfini in terms of the acting, was when he's yelling at Janice about like how she left him and how like, you know, she, you know, oh, you free spirit Janice, like rebel without a cause, leaving while I'm there like stuck with this woman and whatever, like how our head case of a mother. um well, I think like aren't sort of mobsters like, you know,
Into their
well, this
moms,
is,
yeah.
yeah, they love their moms, and like, you know, if you read like a lot of the sort of like the interesting well, I mean, we just sort of know this like in terms of like you know, common knowledge, but also like a lot of the criminological sort of qualitative research showing that like criminals often talk about how much they love their moms and how much their moms mean to them. You'll see like prisoners, you know, prison inmates with like, you know, tattoos of mom, like mom in a heart or something on their arm and whatever. Like, yeah, that's just sort of like a common thing for thugs to like be
Yeah, I think that's
very,
what
very
I
much in
haven't
like their
seen one of those
moms.
mom ted. I mean, I think that's probably like 20, 30 years ago. Yeah,
Yeah, fair
but I
enough.
love
But
those.
like, so
So
Tony
good.
was like clearly like, you know, sort of enamored with his mom and really loved her and everything, despite her mistreatment of him. But then like, okay, so anyway, you know, Janice leaves when he's 16, according to the series. But then in the movie, Tony
She's still
is
around.
17 and she's like still hanging around there. And so if he's
Thinks
17, she's supposed to be 19. And like, that was a sort of weird inconsistency. Like they never mentioned it about like, oh, you're back visiting from Seattle or Berkeley or wherever. Like, she's just there. And like, did they like just forget to like watch the series and get their facts in order about like what actually
Well, I mean,
happened?
wait a minute. Because she's there when the dad is coming home, and they would want to keep it
Okay.
from him, wouldn't they? Wouldn't she come back? Isn't that like? Doesn't
Oh,
that sort of make sense? She
interesting.
would come back,
Okay.
show
That's
up, and
possible.
then yeah, and then
But then
like yeah. So
I feel like either Livia or Tony would say something, you know, like basically out her, you know.
yeah,
But yeah, that's an interesting, you know, that's possible, I
yeah. When does
suppose.
Johnny die? When does Johnny die? Like in the
He dies
universe,
before the series starts, but
right?
I don't know how far back exactly. And I also think that like the guy they got to play Johnny Boy Soprano, the dad, he was not very good either. Like Shane from The Walking Dead, like I don't know, he's not even Italian. He doesn't like he had like none of the mannerisms or charisma of the, I can't remember the actor's name who played in Tony's flashback sequences when he's a little boy. You know,
Yeah.
his dad like chopping off the guy's finger and like whatever, getting arrested by the cops later at the carnival or whatever. Like I thought that guy did like a good job of sort of like capturing like the energy and like the dynamism of like why Tony loved his dad so much and idolized him. But like I don't see like why this guy just was not very interesting to me as Tony's dad. Is that
He,
because like they didn't want to what, have an actor uh draw attention away from Dickie, who's supposed to be sort of like the charismatic lead? They didn't want like Tony's dad to take away the show, steal the show or something. Like I don't know. I was just unimpressed with him.
I thought it was fine. I mean, I thought the guy who played Johnny in the show, I thought he was very actually underwhelming. He didn't
Hmm.
seem like he was like he seemed like he was like an exciting guy who like a very
Okay.
energetic guy who does, you know, maybe he's fun to be around, but he didn't seem like he would actually have the self discipline to be like a real mobster. Well, this guy sort of
Hmm.
does, like when he takes charge, when he takes charge when he comes in, like when he comes back from jail, and he's like, you know, these black people moved into the neighborhood, and like somebody's like, oh, you know, oh, it's okay. He's like, he's a surgeon. And someone's like, oh, he's not going to operate on me. So they did have that old school Sopranos racism, which was, you know,
uh,
they did have these scenes, but he's taking charge.
yeah.
He's like calling himself responsible for the neighborhood, right? He's like telling his daughter to, you know, Janice to go upstairs and like put on something
Oh
more
yeah.
presentable. So he does have this sort of, you know, he does, I think, have this
Like
sort of charisma and leadership.
authoritative.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's not, and yeah, of course, Tony would like that, but you know, I mean, there was just no time at all to focus on any of the relationship between, you know, Tony and his dad, right? Like, I can't even remember them like talking after he came home. Like he hugs him, right? Like what? Like
Yeah, there's no
you
like
could
real
have done
chemistry there.
you could have
Yeah,
done a movie about the family. You could have done a movie about Johnny and Olivia and Tony, and then had like these other people as. But no, you had to have the black story, and then Dicky Maltesante, and then there was, you know, nothing left over for the Sopranos, which is fine. Like if you really made Dicky Maltesante like fascinating and gave him a great story instead of just, you know, yeah, there's no arc. Like the, you know, he kills his dad at the beginning, and then like he wants to be like a good guy, and then he just like, you know, has a rivalry with the black guy, and then, you know, ends up dead because he laughed at left at
Yeah.
Corona. That's his whole
Yeah.
story.
That was so
And
dumb.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
nothing, there's nothing there, right?
And then,
It's
like, it just wasn't carried through. Like it felt like just one scene after another with like there was no like common thread or like no arc, I guess. I mean, he dies, but like I don't know. And then like just there was no layer, no symbolism. I didn't feel like there were any themes like other than the sort of like moralistic political themes you're talking about. But there was no like I don't know. There was just the whole movie kind of like did not. The story fell flat, I think, and the characters, some of them were okay. The actors, I think, portrayed them pretty well, but they just weren't given good material to work with.
what about the
Yeah.
but the yeah, the Maltasante. So he says my wife can't get pregnant. He has a different wife later. Is that what happens? He divorces her and gets a new wife when he has
I
Chris.
don't. That was weird too because I when that happened, I almost thought like, wait a minute. So is Chris the? So I almost wonder like, is it the Italian woman, the
Yeah, it's
Gumar?
apparently not.
But it's
Right.
not. Or if that was just like a because there's a thing though, like if like they can't conceive and then later they can conceive, like why did they throw that line in any like why was that
No, but was it
unnecessary?
when that scene when Johnny comes back from jail when he's at his
I think it's the same. It's the same person.
is it the same woman?
I'm pretty
But then
sure.
no, but he is with the woman. I was it might have must have been because he's with the woman later, and yeah, so like yeah, he can't do so he still has the original wife later.
Yeah, and
So why
somehow she just
maybe
ended up
he's
getting
yeah.
pregnant.
Yeah,
But that's
maybe he's
another
gay.
weird
Maybe
thing.
he's gay too. Maybe that was an excuse for him to be gay, and then finally he performed. Maybe they're both going to
Well,
become gay.
yeah, and then he ends up, he should have ended up with Corrado. Well, that was another weird, like, sort of, whatever, like, inconsistency with the series is that Tony is supposed to be only 10 years older than Christopher. So in the very beginning of the
Oh yeah.
series, Christopher is 30 and Tony is 40. But then in the movie,
Are
Tony's
those numbers
17.
exact? Do you know that's not that you looked this up?
Yeah,
It's
yeah. Look
30
this up
30.
on the HBO site, and on the grave in the movie itself, you see, Christopher Moltisanti, 1969 to 2007, and so yeah, but so like there's a 10-year gap between them, but then in
Yes.
Many Saints, like you see the teenage Tony, 17 years old with like the baby Christopher, and he starts to cry. And then
No, so
I don't know,
Gucci, right? Yeah.
yeah, someone makes that little joke about like, oh, babies can see, they can sense things from beyond the grave or something. But like, okay, so now the ages got messed up here too. Like, I don't know, I just thought that was kind of there was like
Yeah, I'm
some
thinking,
sloppiness there.
might just be sloppiness. Might just be senile David Chase not remembering what's
But
going
someone else
on.
should have caught that, or they could have had that. They could have had the same exact scene with the younger kid, the
Yeah,
young
like
Tony, the little fat kid. Like they could have had that same exact scene
yeah,
where
with
like
Chris
young
being
Tony
10
is,
or
yeah,
8, whatever. Yeah.
whatever, yeah, or yeah, like or have like a young Christopher Moltisanti like very briefly make an appearance or whatever. And we didn't get to see. Yeah, I was kind of disappointed we didn't get to see a young Tony Blendetto, Tony B, the Steve Buscemi character. Like apparently like him and Tony went way back too, like he was
Yeah.
part of the crew, and I think it would have been fun to see like their interaction too, like to get someone who
he was
looks
the
like
only,
a young
didn't he,
Steve.
wasn't he like the only one who had a higher IQ than Tony?
Tony,
Yeah.
and Tony was insecure about it.
Something. Yeah.
Yeah. Tony was, he was a little insecure about that, I think, but yeah, that would have been fun to have him back too. But yeah, instead of like so many of these other like plot points that they highlighted and
What do you think
went
about
with.
Syl and Paulie? I thought the Syl was okay. I thought the Paulie really wasn't very good.
I heard someone
It's hard
say
to do
that.
this. I mean, it's hard. I mean, to find someone like who could plausibly be somebody else like 20, 30 years ago is, I think, very, very hard.
Yeah.
So I'm not too strict on this stuff.
Yeah, I thought they were okay. Yeah, I didn't have like I thought as long as they got the main characters right, that would have been fine. But it almost, yeah, I thought they were fine. Yeah, I didn't really have a strong feel. They didn't do bad. They didn't do great. I don't think.
They weren't a big deal either. I mean, they
I
make
didn't.
basically
well,
cameos.
One thing that they did,
Except
though,
Paulie tries to fight the black guy. That's the only thing.
Oh yeah, with his line, yeah. Well, there was one funny scene with Syl, right? You learn that Syl has a hairpiece that wasn't his real hair.
Syl? I thought that was who was that guy who Tony murdered. What was his name again? The horse, the guy who killed the horse, and then Tony murdered him. That
Oh,
was Richie.
Cifaretto? No, that wasn't
Ralph.
Ralph.
I thought that was Ralph
Yeah,
because Ralph had a hairpiece, right? I thought that was
yeah.
young Ralph. No, that was young
No, that
Sil.
wasn't. That
Wait,
was
Sil was
Sil.
like 20. Wasn't he like 22?
Yeah, and he had a hairpiece. He was going bald already, and yeah, he had which I think makes sense because his hair was like in the series, like I don't know, very few men have such like thick, such a powerful, strong, like thick mane, like the way that Sil had, and the way that it was combed and everything.
No, but that looked.
So
I mean, yeah, okay.
yeah, I don't know, but
That was Sil. No, I thought it was a joke because Ralphie, he had a hairpiece and that was discovered. So I thought that was supposed to be Ralph. Was Ralphie in the movie at all or no?
I don't think Ralph was in the. Yeah, I don't think Ralph and Tony went that far back.
Yeah, Ralph comes along later. Right?
Yeah,
He shows, but he could have been. He could have been around.
yeah. I thought it was. I mean, the whole dynamic was kind of intriguing because, so there was recently this long form piece in the New York Times called why is every young person in America watching The Sopranos? It was okay. Like, I don't know if it wasn't like the most interesting thing, but it had some interesting points in there. And then one was that one reason why people identify with Tony is because Tony experiences imposter syndrome, in part driven by the fact that he sort of climbed the ranks a little too fast because of who he was, right? He was Johnny Boy's son and whatever. And then, like, you sort of see in Many Saints that like everyone does view like Tony as a little kid, right? Like Sil's a grown up, he's kind of young, but he's a grown up. Paulie's a grown up. Like everyone else around him is young, and he really is like this little kid, and he's a high schooler. He's like, and then later he becomes the boss of all of these people. And I think, he does a good job of it, but there is like, I think there were sort of like signs, especially in the earlier seasons, when he's going through the power struggles with Corrado, with, Uncle Junior, and with, Richie Aprile. You sort of see Tony like, a little bit uncertain of himself, like a little bit like later on he becomes like, he sort of grows into his role as the boss. But in the early seasons, you see him sort of struggling with this. I think like, you're sort of like seeing the early signs of that is like, he's much younger than everyone. He sort of skipped ahead a little bit to get to where he is. Something like that. And then like, the way that like every once in a while you'll see like Paulie or one of these guys, like, especially later, like in season 5, Feach LaManna, when Feach LaManna is released from prison, and how he sort of like casually dismisses Tony. And then like when later Tony confronts him about this, the guy says like, I still think of you as a kid. So I thought that was
who's Feach LaManna? Who was that guy? Who's that guy?
Feach LaManna, he was like Robert Lozier played him in season 5. He was he had the gray hair. He had this very like deep, like gravelly, raspy voice. He's the one who sees like I think it was one of Paulie's guys doing like landscaping work, and Feach LaManna just goes up to him and beats him up and says like, it's going to be my guy doing the landscaping around here now, like breaks the guy's arm.
Yeah, I don't remember. I almost thought imposter syndrome. I thought the thing about millennials was they're egotistical and think they're great, and we also say they have imposter syndrome. I don't know if that was the stereotype of millennials, but whenever I heard of imposter syndrome,
I don't know if it's imposter syndrome. That seems more of a Gen X thing to me than a millennial thing.
I always thought it was I don't know. I think there's a lot of things we attribute to wokeness, or we attribute to Gen X or millennials, that are actually just female traits. So I think a lot of like the crying at work stuff, like I've looked at these stories where like someone is crying at this job or that, and they never I look for the gender, and whenever I can find the gender, it's never a man crying. And I always thought imposter syndrome was one of those things. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm psychologically abnormal. I've never like I don't I don't relate to it. I don't know. Do you relate to it? I always thought this was something that like women
sometimes
often feel, but I don't think men often feel. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm just an unusual man.
I mean, I think you're probably right. My suspicion is that there is like a sort of like on average there is a difference, but I mean, I think a lot of young guys feel it too. Or
I think because on Twitter, like you go on Twitter and like it's always like whenever I hear this term, it's always like young female academics. Like,
well, I think like men feel it, but there's like this culture of there's a taboo that like if you're a guy and you're feeling a little uncertain of yourself,
they'll say yes,
like basically like
you should feel bad about yourself. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's that, but then like it's unattractive as a man to like publicly reveal your insecurities. Whereas if you're a woman and you do it, you tend to elicit more sympathy and support from people, right? Whereas like, if you're a guy, it's just like guys don't really think it's cool to like see other guys do that, and women are like a little bit turned off to see it. Like there's just no incentive for a guy to like talk about how how they felt like an imposter today at this academic conference or whatever. Like it's just not that, unless you're already established, right? Then there's sort of counter signaling component. If you're like a 50-year-old full professor and you say, to this day I still have nervousness about public speaking, then you get, then everyone likes that, because you're sort of like a senior person revealing your insecurities is sort of like praiseworthy, but not if you're like a young guy. So yeah, I don't know, like the imposter syndrome thing is, that was like a sort of throwaway line in that piece. And I tried my best to like sort of read it charitably as it connected to the show. And like, I guess like with Tony, there was that element of like, he's this kid and he's like, literally every one of his guys is younger than him. Right. Like, of course, like Christopher and some of like the low level runners in the Soprano crew are younger, but then like his main guys, his key guys are all older.
Yeah. I mean,
right.
I think he is so clearly good at what he does. I mean, compared to those guys, right? I think he sees them as bumbling. I don't, even at the beginning, I think he knows he's good at what he does. Does he have imposter syndrome? No, I can't see it. I mean, it's hard for me to see it. What else does the New York Times article say?
Yeah, what else do I remember from that piece? I mean, well, I think one of the like the more interesting angles from that one was, basically people are feeling what Tony felt. And well, it's kind of like there was a change in tone, but what everyone remembers from the series, which it starts with, and then it kind of like it doesn't really become like a key theme, except maybe implicitly, is Tony saying, I came in at the end, right? Like the best is over. There's this sort of political undertone of like, Tony picks up the paper and it's like, Clinton announces deficit or whatever.
The New York Times. Do you see there was a Wall Street Journal article that I tweeted about today about the Colombo crime family, and basically they talked to some mobsters about like how all the millennials are terrible and they're all on their phones all the times and they're stupid and they're soft. I mean, it's like this is the real.
That's true though. This is happening with the military, man. Like I'm seeing this. Like I mean, it's weird for me because I still feel relatively young to like, complain about kids these days. But like so when I went through basic training at the end of 2007, and it was like prison. You got one phone call on the payphone to give your family your mailing address, and that was it.
Yeah.
And like my friend recently went through a Navy OCS, like basically Navy boot camp, and he was like texting me on his phone, and I'm texting him back like, dude, how are you texting me in boot camp? And he was like, oh, we get 1 hour of phone time. Like you get an hour of phone time? Like what the? And like there's a generational thing here happening, like even within the last 15 years.
Did you see this YouTube video a few years ago where there's like the drill sergeant and the drill sergeant, like they show like training now, and the drill sergeant is like, you will not touch anybody without their affirmative consent. You will not discriminate against anyone based on their race, gender, or sexual orientation. I mean, it's really, you're right. This is this is everywhere.
Like, even among like the sort of tough professions or whatever, like legal and illegal, sort of the military and the mafia. You're sort of seeing this.
I think a lot's going on, right? It's harder to like. First, the RICO statutes. I think that everyone goes back to that. Like you can get the guy now on a conspiracy charge, where before the head guy could just could keep his hands clean. So I think the law really took their toll. Another thing is, they used to prey on like first generation immigrants who didn't speak English, who they could like extort for protection money. Right? There's not many first generation Italian immigrants anymore. It's harder to get away with crimes in general. I mean, with iPhones and stuff, that wasn't there at the Sopranos, but that came later. And there's just like more opportunities to like, there's more opportunities for smart people to do stuff, right? That they can become some kind of
to go legit in some way.
Yeah. And so
that's true.
I think we talked about. I think we talked about our discussion about Sopranos. It was about the suburbs versus city thing. I think that's huge. I think growing up in an urban environment doesn't let you become autistic. I think you have to sort of, you have to deal with people. They're just, in your face all the time. So there's a lot going on. Like, I mean, like the way they react to like the black guys in the inner cities, right? In that generation, they're fighting them. They live right by them. They don't have any choice, right? The next generation, they're just, even Tony, right? They're not living anywhere close to them.
Yeah, they flee
You
to
know,
the suburbs, right? Like they sort of like, they
yeah,
move away or whatever. And like, yeah, the kid, like AJ is not getting into it. Well, there was actually a scene where AJ did get into a fight, I think in season 1, and he gets his ass kicked.
uh,
But he gets into a fight with this white kid at the school, some other Italian kid. And like, yeah, there was like this minor thing. But like, yeah, generally like these kids are, and then and AJ becomes like a much different character later, where he becomes like sort of soft and kind of emotionally fragile and whatever. And so yeah, so AJ is like this emotionally fragile character, and we talked at length about this last time, about how like, back, one of the main themes of the Sopranos is like the sort of young male decline of like, like Tony and his guys are like these sort of tough, like, hardcore mobsters. And then like AJ is like, he has his sort of issues. And then you see Jackie Aprile. His arc is like, sort of sad. He tries to join the mob, but he just doesn't have like the talent or the competence to do it. And Christopher succumbs to his addiction. And like, so all these young guys
yeah,
are sort of like in this sort of generational decline. And I think like, yeah, maybe we're seeing this sort of play out in real life too. Like the Sopranos was commentating on something that was actually happening in the culture, even back then in the sort of mid 2000s, which I think like even, like today compared to then is like actually a pretty big jump. If you compare 2007 to 2021, even now I'm seeing like young guys are just different, man. Like they're soft. They don't want to get their driver's licenses. They're on their phone. Like just, it's different, man. Like I'm seeing this sort of shift now of
yeah,
like just the softness.
yeah. It's
Kids
depressing.
aren't allowed to get in fights anymore. Like, that whole like anti-bullying movement. I'm not even saying like all of this is bad or wrong or whatever, but there is this sort of softness in young guys now where like kids don't get into fights anymore. Like I remember kids would get into fist fights like at minimum 2 or 3 times a week. A fight would break out in my school, and like, it was sort of like a more lower income school or whatever. But like, I think like even among like those kinds of schools today, it's becoming a little bit more rare for, sort of the physicality is sort
Yeah,
of declining.
yeah,
Sports and all this stuff, right? Like, and maybe it's because of what you're saying, that like, if for there's more opportunities for smart people, there are more things you can do with your time. Like I think like part of the reason why kids used to get into fights is because they were bored, and now it's impossible to be bored, right? Like there's so many things on your phone that you could be looking at. Like you don't need to risk getting a bloody nose or
yeah.
something.
Maybe they're just not seeing other people. Yeah,
I
maybe
don't
that's
know.
yeah. They're
Well,
just not
yeah.
spending as much time with each other, so they have no opportunities to fight. No, yeah, you're right, and you see the generation of like, so there's no like greatest generation people there. Maybe the father, right, the older Dicky Maldesante, right, and so then you see the difference. You see Johnny and you see, they're more, yeah, you see them, they're more mentally robust, right? Johnny Dick Maltasante Jr. Even Corrado, for all he's got deep issues, but he's a he's not like,
Yeah.
he's not
Well,
sitting
Tony
around like
himself,
rage
right?
baiting.
Like one of the things with Tony is like it was a huge deal. It's sort of like faded away, but it was a huge deal in season 1 and maybe season 2, where when he was going to therapy. Um, like Livia is like, he's going to see a psychiatrist. Like my son is all, crazy, and like, Junior is concerned about this. Like basically everyone is like, Tony's losing it. Like he's crazy. Like why would he go to therapy? And like there's that scene where season 1, Tony and Christopher are in the car together, and Tony straight up asks him, "Are you depressed?" Because Christopher's talking about, how whatever, how he's languishing or something, and Christopher responds like, "Depressed? No, I'm not a mental midget." Like sort of like trying to be a tough
Yeah,
guy. But you're sort of, I guess, like even among like tough guys like Tony, they still there's yeah they were concerned about him. Like he's clearly tough, right? Like no one can deny that Tony was like willing to like, get into fights, be violent, whatever. But even if he went to therapy, like, he goes to therapy and people suddenly start questioning his like masculinity and his strength. Like,
yeah,
it was just it was a different mindset, that older generation.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's too. Yeah, I mean, you see there's decline on many levels here, right? There's decline in like within the Sopranos universe, and then there's the decline we're talking about between the original show and the
And the show, and then the movie,
and
yeah.
the movie. Yeah, so we've connected to societal decline. Yeah, this left me depressed. I'm not gonna. Yeah, I can't
Oh, I
sugarcoat
wouldn't,
it.
yeah. I wouldn't go
I
that
would be
far.
I
Yeah, I don't
I
know.
will
It's
be
okay.
I mean, I'll be unhappy if there's more if they do anything more with this, right? I would like to just live my life like this never existed, and the Sopranos universe is as
It's
I
not
remember
canon.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well,
is
that's
there?
one of the great things. Yeah, I think it was, yeah, the movie itself was like, I don't know, there's just a lot about, even the way it was shot, like the color palette, it looked like David Fincher directed it, like that sort of cold blue scheme, like it didn't feel like The Sopranos at all. I don't know. There was
Yeah,
just, yeah, so many things about it that were, I think that were sort of misguided or not well executed.
yeah. So is there anything else we should let the viewers or let the listeners know about the movie?
Oh, I don't know. I think we did a pretty good job dissecting it, and yeah, I mean, I'd be curious, like, if for viewers who have watched the movie to comment, on this video, like what you think we got wrong, or just sort of like what your opinion of this movie was. Was it better than we thought? Was it worse? Just
Yeah,
curious to
if
hear
you're
other
going to
thoughts about this.
comment on the Substack where this will go up, because you don't want to get lost in the YouTube comments. Which, if this blows up, they'll just be stupid, and so we'll have to really work to find the good ones. But in the Substack, they're pretty much all higher quality. So just comment there, and yeah, we look forward to seeing what people think. And this was fun. Until next time, Rob.
All right, cool. Take care, Richard.